Okay, so welcome to Storytelling for Minority Corporate Business Professionals and Leaders. My name is Dr. Mario Wallace, and thank you for joining the session today. This session is designed to help you harness the power of storytelling to advance your career, influence decision-making, and drive business impact. As minority professionals, we often face unique challenges in corporate spaces, whether it's being heard in meetings, advocating for change, or providing our value beyond just the numbers. Storytelling is a powerful tool that allows us to translate data, experiences, and insight into compelling narratives that resonates with leadership and colleagues. Corporate environments run on data, but numbers alone do not inspire actions. Stories do. Given that we spend so much time at the director level leader position, we tend to be operationally focused and operationally driven, meaning that we live within the space of Excel spreadsheets, access databases. So we talk about things and situations using numbers most of all. And the challenge to transition from a director level leader into executive leader, we struggle to make the transition because of a lack of storytelling, which is directly connected to executive presence. I have a Black business professional coaching program in which I help Black business leaders understand the principles of strategic impact. Storytelling is one of the principles of strategic impact, strategic planning, change management, executive presence, and communication. Those are the elements of strategic impact that drive an organization. But what I do is I take them through theory so they can understand the core element of what is strategic impact. And after taking them through theory and theoretical concepts, teaching them different frameworks and what it means for them, I actually help them to apply those principles to be some of the higher performing leaders, minority leaders in an organization. One thing we need to learn and understand the importance of storytelling in leadership, learn how to effectively use data to craft compelling stories, identify storytelling strategies to advance organizational goals, how to interpret data from data sheets, from Workday databases, from EMR databases, and align that data, align it with goals and initiatives to drive performance within an organization, and explore real world examples of healthcare, higher education, secondary education, and manufacturing, and develop skills to engage diverse audiences and influence decision making using storytelling. Some of the most successful leaders, like JFK, was a great storyteller. Martin Luther King Jr. was a great prolific storyteller. And I can just imagine Harriet Tubman, the experience that she had. She had to craft a compelling story to get people to buy into her mission and escape and be willing to leave based on the dangers they face to get from the South to the North. So storytelling is very, very, very important and critical for minority business professionals who seek to break the glass ceiling in corporate organizations. What is leadership storytelling? So leadership storytelling is the art of using data to craft narratives to convey messages, motivate teams, and drive change within organizations. Using data effectively, data adds credibility to your story and backs up your narrative with hard evidence. You can use statistics and data in your stories, but it cannot be heavily statistically focused where you lose the attention of those who are listening to the story. Remember now, storytelling is not just telling stories to executive leaders, but it's also telling stories to your team. So if an executive leader can understand a lot of data, statistical information, they would like for you to communicate to them that way, but they would like for you to also to add some narrative to how you're communicating. They do not want to sit there and listen to you talk numbers all morning in a meeting. But when you transition that or translate that information to your peers and to your direct reports, it has to be in a softer form where they can actually understand it and know their roles in helping you to achieve the challenges that you're telling within your story. Data presented in a way that resonates emotionally with your audience. Cotter is one of the first that talked about how do you create change in the organization. And one of the first things he said, create a compelling story that is emotionally driven, that connects with your audience. Then data should illustrate not just what happened, but also why it matters, and use data to explain the why behind your organizational goals. From an executive position, an executive data storyteller transforms complex data into compelling narratives that drive decision-making and inspire action. They connect insights with real-world application by blending data analytics, strategy, and psychology. Through data points, trends, and visualization, they make information accessible. People in executive positions, whether they were not great storytellers initially when they were hired into those positions, over time, they develop into great storytellers. They have to develop into great storytellers. Executives talk with board of directors, talk with partners, talk with stakeholders in the community, talk with shareholders. And the people they're talking with, they have to be able to tell these stories. In these particular rooms, the audience are not there to listen to a lot of data being communicated. You cannot pull out an Excel file from an ERM system that talks about data in a rural populated area as it relates to healthcare. And the whole conversation is about the statistics as it relates to underrepresented minorities, medically underserved communities, food deserts. You have to tell a compelling story about the data to get people to really buy into why should they help you, why should they allow you, the board of trustees, allow you to go down a path of creating a strategic plan to improve the health outcomes from people in a rural populated area. Or why should you go to a lobbyist to get them to push something for you through either your local lawmakers or in Washington, D.C.? You have to be able to tell a compelling story. It's not just having the skills and competency to drive adaptation in an organization, but it's also how do you communicate the story? The challenges that we have, minority professionals, are hired into more director level leadership positions. We're promoted into or we're hired into those positions. So if you think of the pyramid concept, at the top of the pyramid, you have a top 6%. And that's a small percent of people, minorities across the country. As it relates to the second tier, now you're looking at a top 65, 70% of minority business professionals, particularly African Americans. Given that they're in that role for so long, they only communicate information to the executive leadership team using data points. And if you are using data points for years in a position where you're not expected to tell stories using your data, then you are trapped into a mindset of communicating everything, explaining everything using data points. So here, director level lead without storytelling experience may struggle to turn raw data into meaningful insights. They often rely on spreadsheets and report without crafting clear narratives, leading to confusion and disagreement, especially when talking to direct reports. They do not, your direct report, frontline workers have no clue, struggle to keep up with the information that you're sharing with them, struggle to adapt to the changes that you're trying to present because you're talking in a foreign language to them. Your peers understand the data that you're using, understand what it means. But when you go down to the front line, you are losing them in every data point that you share. You cannot communicate. There's a 30% student turnover rate. There's a 60% student retention rate. those numbers don't mean anything to a lot of frontline workers. So, what are the skills we need, or a minority business professional who's not an executive or could be an executive need to be effective in telling stories? So, one is data literacy, understanding how to interpret, analyze, and apply data to business challenges. How do you look at an Excel spreadsheet? How do you look at something from an EMR system? How do you look at something from Workday or a enterprise resource management system? How do you look at that information and identify the challenges within the data to be able to think critically, right? Looking for insights within the data to connect it to some type of emotional story to communicate to your direct reports, your peers, and to executive leadership leaders. Narrative building, structure data into compelling stories with a clear beginning, a clear middle, and a clear ending. This is a skill that's taught in the School of Communication. We tell stories often that we probably don't realize that have, and we, based on our own experiences, that have beginning, middle, and ending, but we don't practice how to tell those stories, how to craft those stories. We don't take our time and write the beginning, middle, and end, just like writing an essay and writing in between. So, how would I begin this story if I had to tell this story using this data set? What will be the middle of the story, right? Who is the antagonist within the middle of the story, right? Who is the hero? And then how do I conclude this story? And my conclusion needs to be in a way that it emotionally motivates people to want to assist me in this particular vision. Fourth is visualization, using tools like Power BI, Tableau, and Excel to present data in an engaging way. Uh, since artificial intelligence is leading the industry today as it relates to all things, Power BI is a great tool to use to be able to communicate data in more of a visual, compelling way than a traditional Excel spreadsheet. Emotional intelligence, how to connect the emotions to the story, business acumen, connecting data insights to financial, operational, and strategic objectives. So now, since we've crafted the story, how do we also include in the narrative certain strategic initiatives that we can focus on to help tie it back to the organization? Communication and persuasion and adaptability, being able to pivot the story based on audience feedback and changing data trends. So if you're communicating a compelling story in a town hall setting, how do you adapt that story within the town hall setting based on the feedback that you're giving? When someone takes a microphone and they ask a question, and that question leads people to start thinking differently than how you originally started telling the story, how do you adapt in that presence? We have to be very adaptable to be able to pivot and to create a consistent, compelling story. The end goal of telling a story is to mobilize the people to action. That is the end goal. So when you think of the skill sets, data literacy, critical thinking, narrative building, visualizational skills, emotional intelligence, business acumen, communication and persuasion, and adaptability. These are the 8 skills that's needed to be an effective and a great storyteller.
So, Dr. Wallace, great slide. I just have a question. So, when it comes to visualization and you're doing storytelling, should you always be prepared with a script on what you're going to say? Should there be some preparation, or should you just do it coldly? Do you pass out documentation that helps to tell the story? Going back to your visualization, I mean, what do you do in order for a preparation, especially if you are an individual that's going into a new organization? Um, it's a new role for you. How do you ensure that you become a great data storyteller for your role?
Yeah, yeah. So great question, great question. So yeah, you have to prepare. So this is like it's like preparation and rehearsal of information, right? So you prepare. And when you're at an organization, you also need to do things like collect data. It's like almost like academic research. Collect data from people within the organization, such as interviews or just conversations where you're collecting data. They may not know you're collecting the data. Your meetings are purposeful. You also begin to look into certain databases and you take all that information, you compile all that information together. It's almost like a synthesizing of data, and you begin to write a narrative based on what you're seeing. So one part of it is what is the problem, the other part of it is what is the solution. So you take it and you write it out, right? Beginning on the top of a sheet of paper, middle and end, and you craft what the beginning is. The beginning is where we are today and what the problem that we're facing based on some data that you're going to present. And that data could be some type of visual representation. So you can present more
Mhm.
infograms or visualization infograms to people in your stories. So thus, if you're presenting to a board of a board of trustees or something, you could pass out 2 or 3 sheeters that have visuals on those particular sheets that helps to align to the narrative that you're about to present as you tell that story.
Will you make these slides available, please, after?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Collect as much data as you can so that you begin to draft narrative on how you plan to communicate with people within an organization when you get the opportunity. So when you meet with people, if you're communicating compelling stories consistently with people, they're going to look at you differently, right? They're going to really trust how you communicate and begin to respect you in a unique way on how you tell stories. Thank you for joining us. Training today is on, or the lecture today is on storytelling for minorities in corporate America. And the discussion right now is about what strategies, what skills do you need to be a great storyteller? And in this particular slide is how to become a great executive level data storyteller. These are the things that you need to be able to do to effectively be a storyteller. The first one is master data tools and analytics. Take courses in Power BI, Tableau, Excel to improve your data visualization and analysis skills. Practice storytelling. Regularly present insights in meetings, ensuring data is framed as a story rather than numbers. So you don't have to just do this in meetings. You need to do this yourself, right? Maybe you create this little workbook for yourself and you practice storytelling. Find a data set within your organization, read and interpret that data set, and try to map the data set out in more of a narrative form from beginning, middle, and end, right? Identify the problem statement, identify the solution, and identify the steps to take to mobilize the people in the organization. Engage in public speaking and communication training. Study great storytellers. Look at TED Talks, right? Look at business leaders. Look at case studies uh, on effective data storytelling. Work closely with analysts. Ask them about certain data sets that they have, and ask them to explain those data sets to you. Get comfortable with reading statistics. Get very comfortable with reading and interpreting surveys. Get very comfortable in interpreting questionnaires. Get very comfortable in interviewing. You know, one thing that Steve Jobs did often, he would do these informal interviews. He would jot questions down on a napkin or even on his hand, and he would conduct these informal interviews with the intent to learn certain key things. He would take that information back and he would use that information to begin to address some of the challenges in Apple's technology or to build out a new feature to address those things within the technology. Seek feedback from senior leaders, present insight to executives, and ask for guidance in improving your delivery. Apply insights to business strategies, move beyond reporting, and use data to drive change, innovation, and make decision making, and develop executive presence. Work on confidence, clarity, and persuasion in presenting information.
So when you go back, again, apply insights to business strategy, will you go more in depth on that particular square box that helps to drive innovation and decision making?
Okay, so storytelling is about telling a compelling narrative, but within the narrative, you have solutions. So applying insights to business strategy to go beyond reporting. So what is the problem and what is the solution? And how does the solution tie to strategy within an organization? So basically, based on the data you're trying to interpret and you're trying to create a compelling story around, you need to be able to tie that story back to the institutional strategy, back to the institutional strategic plan or the business unit strategic plan. And when tying it back to the plan, first you're reporting out what the problem is, then you're reporting what the solution is. And in the solution, it may be a change in procedure, a change in process, or a change in technology. And based on those changes, change creates anxiety. So once you tie it to the organizational strategy, now you have to deal with the people side. So now you have anxiety and resistance. So in the communication of this compelling story, you have to be able to explain how you will mobilize the people according to business initiatives that's identified in your compelling story. How would you mobilize the people to drive change to impact your bottom line in your organization?
So for those of us that may be in transition or making transition, so do you offer one-on-one coaching services to help us effectively do this and create a strategy to help improve and develop our skills?
Well, yeah. There are four parts: strategy, storytelling, communication, and executive presence. All of them are tied together. Within the coaching, we talk about executive presence. That's one of the first things we talk about is executive presence and how that's tied to storytelling, how that's tied to strategy, how that's tied to communication. Because all four is what make you stand out as a leader. The coaching covers all the four elements that I just mentioned. Executive leaders can agree with. Uh, in addition to that, you have to be able to mobilize the people. So yeah, coaching program helps to highlight those areas. So here's a framework to help in crafting data-driven stories. And it starts from the beginning, from context, and it works you from context all the way down to impact. So the first thing is context, provide background on the situation or challenge. What is the background? What's happening in the organization? Why do we need to even address this within an organization? What is the challenge and what is the situation? Data. Share the relevant data that informs the situation. There are uh, data points that's included in the compelling story, but not a lot. There are key data points. And some of the words within the compelling story are translated from data to actual words, where you're explaining the data in words without using numbers, like an experience, like in 2024, some of 2024, COVID took place. I'm just hypothetically saying, and people within Southeast Arkansas, we saw a spike or increase in respiratory challenges within our specific region, which led to us having to partner with other people, other communities, to mobilize and get people within Southeast Arkansas to certain critical access hospitals, because most of the people within Southeast Arkansas didn't have access to transportation, didn't even have the right type of insurance coverage and things like that. So we have to make sure that we can create a pathway from their communities to critical access hospitals and to acute hospitals in Little Rock, Arkansas, to ensure that we can have a healthy population at the end of the actual health crisis in America. So we have to be able to connect those things in our stories without necessarily using data points all the time. Insight, interpret the data and uncover the key messages within the data. What is the data telling? I'm going to show you 4 different data sheets, and I want conversations from you all to tell me what is the data telling you. Also, action, present the decisions made based on the data, and impact, share the results of the projected outcome. Start from context and work your way down to data, insight, action, and impact. All the slides from this point on, as the information is being presented to you based on different stories that I've crafted for this conversation, all of them are written in this particular sequential order from context to data, insight, action, and impact. It's just a way to craft stories for you. So it's an easier way that you can craft your stories using data to drive change and mobilize people within organizations. So let's talk about healthcare for a second. So if you worked in healthcare and you've pulled data from an EMR system, and the data set looks like this. So we have metrics, 30-day readmission rate, pre-intervention 20%, 22%, length of stay 7.5%, post-discharge follow-up rate 40%, post-discharge follow-up rate 40%, patient satisfaction rate 75%, total readmission cost. So the cost of readmission is $500,000. If I'm reading this data correctly, don't look at post-intervention and change. Just think about this column and this column. My 30-day readmission rate is 22%. 22% is a whole lot of money that is costing an organization. If a patient comes to an intake hospital and gets treated and leave the hospital and return in less than 30 to 60 days, the organization have to acquire the cost. That is a huge burden on a hospital. So the goal is to reduce the readmission rate drastically, like 10%, 8%. The story that you're trying to tell is that there is a 22% readmission rate. There is a length of stay of 7.5. There is a post-discharge follow-up of 40%. And there's patient satisfaction of 75%. And the total readmission cost is $500,000. How would you tell that story?
So for me, looking at this, I would lead off with from a trending perspective where we were like around this time last year. So
Okay.
I would really look at the data, the metrics to help drive the conversation, not only where we were a year ago, but just even 6 months ago, 3 months ago. I would do integral time, tested times, or I'm not saying that correctly, but just from a timing perspective, looking at the data trending maybe quarterly for the last year.
Okay.
So I would want to know is like what unit is this 22% coming from? Why is it length of stays? Is it due to staffing? Are these new nurses, old nurses? What's the nurse mix? And then I would really question the discharge. Why is discharge at 40%? And then the patient satisfaction, I have an issue. So why are we not delivering care to the best of our ability? And then what's the impact looking at that discharge rate? Why aren't we following up with patients after their discharge? Why is it at 40%?
Okay.
So I would really have a lot of questions why, but I wouldn't just look at I would look at the data, but I would want to ask questions to help fill out the story.
Tools that you would need, like data analytics, storytelling. How do you look at data sets, interview people, send out some type of questionnaire, something to give you some real details of what is really taking place within this department within the healthcare organization. Our readmission rate is 22%, length of stay is 7.5%, Post-discharge follow-up is 40%, patient satisfaction 75%. Well, that's not the way to effectively communicate data to get people connected to the data and emotionally ready to help you solve the problem. So the reason why I have this whole slide where I address pre-intervention, post-intervention, and change is that when you tell the story,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the story has to include the pre-intervention, the current state. The story has to include the post-intervention. How do you plan? What is solution? How do you plan to solve towards that solution? And then what is the change between the two? Because the pre and
Mm-hmm.
the post intervention will help you to mobilize the people, to get the people engaged in wanting to help you to achieve this. So your story is communicating the problem, which is pre-intervention, based on the current state, the future state, post-intervention. You have to be able to tie this to the organizational strategy and show how you and what strategies you would do in your compelling story to get an organization from 22% to 19%, from
Mm-hmm.
7.5% to 6.8%. So when you think of a data set and when you're trying to practice and build your competencies and skills in telling stories, always look at a data set, look at the current statistics or numbers, and think of a post prevention set of numbers that you want to pair with those, and then start to write your beginning problem, your middle problem in a narrative, and your ending problem on how you plan to tie it to strategy and mobilize the people.
So if I just analyze how I explain this to you, I didn't even, being that leader, I was looking at this is our cost. I was looking at the $500,000. I wasn't looking at the post intervention. So I did it correctly because I didn't include the entire story because
Yes.
I was just looking at, oh, wow, this is what it's costing us, but not looking, I didn't provide a snapshot of the entire picture because I just concluded 22%, but knowing that it had changed, but I still would want to know when did it go to 19, the post intervention. So I see what you're saying, going back to the previous slides of how I didn't effectively communicate because
Mhm.
I was just only focused on one set of data sets and not the entire data set that you have provided here.
Meet with the executive, they say we need to be at 6.8%. And you're saying, wow, how do I get us from 7.5 to 6.8? So that means you will go out and do some pulse interviews, quick checks, talk to a couple of people in different departments, identify which department is struggling the most, and you collect the data. Once you collect the data, then you present a compelling story addressing the pre and the post and the changes and how you plan to mobilize the people to get us there.
Thank you.
I crafted these example in the same context of context, data, insight, action, impact, and lesson. Addressing patient readmission rate in healthcare system, data shows the high readmission rate is 30 days post-discharge. Data highlights. So this is, once you look at the data sheet, you talk to leaders, you go out and you conduct some post interviews, some quick interviews, gather some data, and you come back and you draft out, what's the context? What's the data? What's the insight? Data highlights areas in which patients care and follow-up procedures need improvement. Action leadership implements a post-discharge follow-up program with healthcare teams and improve patient education materials. Uh, Impact readmission rates dropped by 15% within 6 months, demonstrating improved patient care and cost savings. We're addressing the problem and we're addressing the solution. Leaders can use patient data to tell stories that advocate for systemic change. So if you're telling the story a few months ago, we've noticed concerning trend, too many patients were being readmitted within 30 days of discharge. This is the compelling story. So we've gone from looking at a data set, meeting and talking to people within the organization on why we are having these challenges, talking to executive leaders or talking to your peers, and identifying where we should be as an organization. So, so now we went from pre-intervention to post-intervention, and now we have to take that data and communicate that data in a compelling way. With this insight, we took action. We launched post-discharge follow-up program, ensuring healthcare teams stayed connected with the patients. After they left the hospital, we also improved patient education material to better prepare them for recovery at home. Our readmission rates dropped by 15% within 6 months, leading to a better patient outcome. We have to identify what are the goals, what are the initiatives we plan to do to mobilize the people to help us bring this change and cost savings to the organization. So storytelling, highlighting challenges in education. Here's another data set. As director level leaders, we find ourselves caught up in the data, caught up in the numbers. And given that we have no skills and practice in telling compelling stories to executives, or if we are an executive or frontline workers, to mobilize them to emotionally want to participate to help meet these particular goals, we just tell numbers using data. So if I'm talking to another director level leader, all I'm saying to that leader is that, hey, I looked at the data set and this is where we are. Our graduation rates for minority students is 60%. Graduation rates for my non-minority students is 80%. Mentoring program is 0%. Retention rate for minority students is 75%. Minority student enrollment is 30%. Post-intervention hasn't taken place. You have to communicate that to executive leaders. How would you communicate this information? Just the initial point without looking at post-intervention, because these are the things that you have to determine where the organization need to be. The solution is included with within the post-intervention. So if you see a data set that looks at the pre-interventions, 60%, 80%, 0%, 75%, 30%, how would you begin to draft that conversation to share that with your team or executive leaders? Graduation rates for minority students is 60%. Graduation rates or rate for non-minority students is 80%. So there's a 20% drop, a 20% difference. Mentoring programs. We do know through research that minority students do well when they're paired with mentors. What we see here, and that's just studying literature or studying case studies, we see here that there's zero participation in the mentor program. Like UA Little Rock had African American initiative, male initiative, African American female initiative, Hispanic American male and female initiative. We do know that those programs increase the graduation rates for minorities at UA Little Rock. So we do know that they work. So what we see here, there's 0%. What can impact this number for us is if we can increase participation in the mentor program. So how do we tell a story?
Looking at the pre-intervention, again, is this, graduation rate, I would look at the minority students versus. So for me, what is it that the institution is not doing to help ensure minority students graduate? So that would be like that first question when I think about this.
Mhm.
And then help to better understand why is it that Black, or I'm sorry, minority students, they're not partnered with a mentor. Like why, what's the issue with not having a mentor for these students? So we're failing in that area. And
Okay.
then just the retention rate, what are we doing that's, looking at it 75 compared to 80? So we're doing something right. However, what's the length of time for graduation rate? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 6 years? How long is it actually taking them? And just happy understanding, minority students enrollment is 30. 30, it's not good. How do we increase that even more to get 65% and above? So I would really look at the factors that's actually impacting um, a lot of these datas before I actually make any conclusion or even set post-intervention numbers.
The challenge is, how do we begin to tell this story with the pre-intervention numbers? How do we communicate that to people within an organization?
So I would start up, there's an opportunity for improvement
Okay.
here when
Okay.
it comes to the graduation rate for minority students.
Okay. Okay.
Say if you are in Texas, this is a school in Texas, I would look to see are students coming from Dallas or from Houston or from Austin or from San Antonio. I would want more data than just the grad. Where are the students coming from
Okay.
that's graduating, successfully and just their time? So I would want more to help me look at this 60%.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I would say something like exactly the way you started off, that we need to improve on our minority student graduation rates. Currently, when we look at the numbers, the non-minority students are graduating at a higher rate than the minority students. But one thing that I see that I think that we could do to improve those numbers is focus on building a stronger and more viable mentoring program. Based on data that I've read in different research, I see that mentoring programs for African American, particularly, and minorities in general, seem to have an effect on graduation rates. So this is just an initial conversation I'm having with someone, some peers or executives within the organization, within the higher ed institution, which that's the initial conversation. But then I go out, I collect data, I determine what the post intervention look like. I ask other peers and other executives in those particular areas. They tell me that if we can get the graduation rates to 70%, that's a 10% increase. We can get the mentoring program up to 50%. All of this is tied to the strategic plan in the organization, and all of them include strategic initiative, meaning we have to put money towards these post interventions, right? A mentoring program that exists with zero participation to get it to 50%, that includes human capital, that may include technology, right? That may include training and education. So there will be a cost associated with all the post intervention that leads to the changes in the organization. But we have to be able to communicate it in a compelling story to get to the post intervention. Then we communicate it out to our peers as well as our direct reports in a compelling way. So again, I always break it down into the framework that I shared with you before on how crafting a compelling story. The first thing is low graduation rates from minority students in a large university. The data, graduation data reveals 20% gap between minority and non-minority students. So as I look at the pre-intervention data, I begin to craft out this, my context, my data, my insight, my actions, and my impact, right? The data points challenges us as inadequate academic support and mentoring program action. Leaders launch a mentoring program and academic support program specifically targeted to minority students. Impact, graduation rates of minority students should increase within the first year, second year, third year, and so forth. So basically, we write this out based on the initial data that we saw, and then we combine all of it together and we communicate a compelling story to leaders and people within an organization. When looking at our graduation rates, troubling patterns emerge. Minority students graduating at 20% lower than their peers. Does everybody see where I'm going with this as far as looking at the data set and crafting a story to share with people within the organization?
So that could it also be persuasion communication almost?
Yes, yes. Potter's first step of change, he uses persuasion communication. Basically, he says to tell the story in a way that gets people to fixate it on the story. So if you need to exaggerate, he says exaggerate. So that's just a way of appealing to people's emotion by exaggerating what's really taking place in the real business case for the change. But when you're telling a compelling story, you're not having to tell all the data points, but you have a specific data point that stands out that you want to communicate as you tell that story. The data pointed to clear challenges. Many students lack access to strong academic support and mentoring. With this insight, and now we get into the solution and we get into the strategy, the initiative. We launched a targeted mentoring program and academic support program to provide guidance and resources these students need to succeed. And The conclusion of it, there's two stories. There's one story told in the beginning, once you look at the data set and try to find insights within the data to provide some type of strategic change, to drive change in the organization. Then you go out and you interview, you talk to people. And as you talk and collect data, you're trying to think of a post intervention. So then you go out and you tell this story to executive leaders, you get them to buy into it because you have to build demand and persuade leaders to give you the funding or whatever you need to drive this particular initiative and drive this change based on a compelling story. Then you communicate it out to your team to mobilize them. Once it's communicated, it has the beginning, the middle, the problem statement, the solution, as well as initiative that's going to drive the project. After you work with your team for maybe 2 or 3 months in this and you start to see success, then you go back and you communicate that story again. But this time you use a third bullet. Graduation rates were for minority students increased by 4% within the first year. More than just numbers. It is a story of equity and opportunity. So now you're communicating a story after you've had success, and that's called early wins. You have to communicate your successes as you go and start to work on those particular initiatives. But the first thing you have to do, you have to tell a compelling story to get buy-in from executive leadership team in order to fund those initiatives to create the change that you want to make in the organization. Storytelling in secondary education and leadership. Let's look at the data set. This is the challenge that we face as minority business professionals. We face being able to find insights and interpret the data that we're seeing to create a compelling story. We can talk numbers all day, but exactly, do numbers help mobilize people and motivate people to help initiate or drive change in the organization? They don't. In fact, if you're communicating these numbers to a lot of frontline employees, some of them can't even interpret what you're actually saying. So if we say something like student engagement was 55%, student attendance rate is 85%. So you're really talking and you're forcing people, especially at the frontline level, to try to connect the dots. So secondary education leadership, student performance. Average test score is 62%. Attendance rate, 85%. Student engagement, 55%. So we have 85, we have a student rate of 85% of people coming, attendance rate. But those 85% of people who consistently come to school, they're testing at 62% at a low, right? 62%. The engagement of the 85% is 55% engaged. 55% of the 85% of students who are coming are engaged. After school program enrollment is 0%, graduation rate 75%. How would I tell this story to executive leaders to get buy-in? The first thing we have to do is talk about the average test scores. Currently, we have challenges with student test scores. But what's quite interesting is our attendance rate is quite higher than what we've seen in the past year. But even though we have high attendance rates, for some reason, there is a low engagement, and we need to figure out why our students are not engaged as they should be to help drive our test scores. For instance, like when we looked at research, we noticed that high enrollment in after-school program has a direct impact on student engagement, attendance, and average test scores. But when we look at within our students, we see that none of our students are participating in the after-school program. And because of that, we see that there is a drop in student engagement, attendance, and average test scores. But even when we tell the story, remember, the first story that you're trying to create demand with leaders is using pre-intervention numbers. Once you tell the story and you get demand, then you go back and you collect data, right? You go back and you collect data because you want to create a post-intervention. And in the data, you need to identify What is the post intervention? Where should we be for average test scores? Where should we be for attendance rate? Where should, in comparison to other organizations, where should we be at? Or we look at historical data within our own, or we look around and do benchmarking with other organizations. So when we do our post intervention, then we go out and we sell a story to our direct reports and our peers. Now it's time for us to create a beginning that includes a problem statement, create a middle that includes a solution, and create an end of the story that explains the 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 goals and initiatives that will lead us to achieving these post intervention numbers. Context: declining performance of students in underfunded school districts. Data: test scores and attendance data show underperformance and high rates of economically disadvantaged areas. Insight: data reveals a need for greater investments in education resources and extracurriculum support. Action: school leaders implement after school tutoring program to expand access to technology. Impact: test scores improve, student engagement rises, leading to a stronger community involvement. We notice a troubling trend. Students in underfunded school districts are falling behind with low test scores and attendance rates. The data confirm what we suspected. The greatest challenge were in economically disadvantaged areas. Insight: these students need more resources and support beyond classroom. And now we get to the solution. In response, we launched after-school tutoring program and expanded access to technology to level the playing field. So remember now, the first thing we have to do is what? Create demand. And what is creating demand? Interpreting data, looking at a data set, interpreting the data, and communicating the data to executive leadership or your peers or the president of the organization. If you are an executive, you're communicating out to your peers, you're communicating to a board, you're trying to get people to buy into this idea and these solutions that these problem and these solutions that you've identified, and to fund these ideas to drive change in the organization. But it starts with looking at data sets, consistently studying data sets, looking for areas of opportunity within the data set. So you're looking for insights consistently. And once you find the insights, how do you craft that story to present to your peers, the president, the chancellor of a healthcare organization, to get them to buy into the story that you're selling? And once you get them to buy into the story, then you ask questions about, well, where should we be? They would give you where they think we should be based on talking to the CFO, chief marketing officer, maybe the provost. You may have to talk to multiple people to determine what the post intervention should look like, right? The CFO may say, if we increase the readmission rate by 20%, that'll give us an additional 1.2 million. If we increase the enrollment of minority students by 15%, that'll give us 500,000. But thus, you have to talk to the peers. If you're an executive, you have to talk to your operations manager, because there may be some changes in classroom structure, from a traditional lecture type classroom to a flipped classroom that would increase the engagement of the students. So there may be some new building design. You may talk to marketing and communication, because now the new campaign that supports your initiative needs to be communicated out in the way that campaign needs to be communicated out to the organization. It needs to be compelling, right? It needs to provoke emotion or invoke emotions. So you're working with marketing and communication, you're working with the CFO, chief finance officer, you're working with the chief operations officer. You're talking to the president, the provost of the president, provost, or chancellor of a university, the CEO of a manufacturing plant, or of a hospital. you're having these conversations with them, which lead to your post interventions. So now you have to tell the story to your peers and your direct report to get them to buy into this vision. Storytelling in manufacturing, leadership, productivity, and cost. We think of the pre-interventions, the metrics, productivity units produced per day, equipment downtime, hours per day, annual production cost, employee training hours, maintenance costs. Anytime you see downtime, that means that this is the time when the equipment is not producing anything. They have a 4-hour downtime. And there's something called quick change of dies, right? So as a shift, as you change go from first shift to second shift and second shift to third shift, there's always a downtime, equipment downtime. But the faster we can turn around and get people out of the manufacturing plant and the next shift into the manufacturing plant, we can reduce these numbers from 4 hours to 3 hours to 2 hours to 1 hour. Because of this, we're only producing 1,000 units per day, which could actually be 2 or 3,000 units per day. And the actual production cost is costing us way too much money, 5 million, when we need to get it down to even lower than that. Employee training hours is way too low. So how will we tell this particular story? How would this story be told to executive leaders to get buy-in? Say, hey, we have challenges with the bumper installation within the plant. Our current downtime is 4 hours, which costs us on average $5 million within a month. We're trying to create demand from executive leadership to help us fund some type of initiative to sway change in the organization. Now, here's the other thing. If you're a minority business leader and you want to be looked at as one of the star performers or promoted into an executive position from a director level position, you really need to study data. You need to study data. You need to because opportunities live within data sets. If I'm studying this data set, I see one of the main drivers of low productivity and performance is 4 hours of downtime equipment. So if I want to tell this story, I would say, like, when I look at our warehouses within 2 states like Arkansas and Texas, I notice consistently that we have a challenge with equipment uptime, which creates a high absorbent production cost for the company. And also, in addition to that, we have low training hours, meaning no one is participating in the training, which has a direct correlation to equipment downtime. We need a solution to be able to address this so we can increase our training hours by at least 200 hours. And if we can increase our training hours, we can we can increase our uptime of uptime of equipment, which would save us millions of dollars. And when you get the pre-intervention data and the post-intervention data, you tell this compelling story to the entire organization,